Water Commission meeting to order for Wednesday, September 18th. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks all for the adjusted special meeting time, both the date and the length today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Can we do a roll call, please?
Chair Snyder,
Here.
Vice Chair Keller,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Young,
Here.
Commissioner Cooney,
Here.
and Councilmember Sneddon.
Are there
So all
any
are present.
changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Is there any public comment?
No public comment.
So we have two consent items today, the meeting minutes and the water agency's update for CCWA, CCRB, and COMB. I did have a question just about the water agency's update, which was I saw that there was the CCWA board meeting on the 13th and just wanted a quick update on the outcome of that meeting.
Good afternoon, Water Commissioners, Chair Snyder. There was a Water Commission meeting, a CCRB meeting on the 13th. Most of that meeting occurred in closed session, so I can't really talk about what we discussed.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions or move to approve?
Madam Chair, I have a comment, actually two comments. One on item A, the meeting minutes, just to show that I read them. The register and the vote on item 5 of consent item, the vote was 4-0 with 1, right, not 4-0-0, because Young abstained, okay? But my real comment was on the item B, the water agency update. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really well done in terms of comprehensiveness in that regard. And I've been sitting here for a number of years. I learned more in that report about, COMB and their storm responses. I had no idea the level of responsibility goes to that level. And again, the comment on the 30-year contract extension being under duress, it was very informative. So I just wanted to thank staff for the thoroughness that was in that report. Oh, and I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Can we get a roll call, please?
All right, Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
and, Chair Snyder.
Yes. Moving on to the administrative items, our first item is 6A, the El Estero Water Resource Center Electrical Distribution Renewal Project.
Good afternoon, Chair Schneider and members of the Water Commission. I'm Thomas Welch, the acting wastewater system manager. I'll be doing the presentation on this project today. We're here to talk about the renewal El Estero Water Resource Center Electrical Distribution Renewal Project and request Water Commission support of the contracts for construction. So, this project has been a work in progress since about 2018. We did a facility master plan in 2018, and this was identified as pretty much our highest risk and really the foundation for any future improvements that need to be made for the treatment plant. It removes a lot of the bottlenecks we currently have to be able to make improvements to either facilities or implement electrical improvements throughout the facility. So one of the big things we'd like to do is increase our renewable energy production at El Estero is one of our sustainability goals. And with our current 40-plus-year-old electrical distribution equipment, we just can't do that. So this project will not only increase our resiliency and reliability by replacing those 40-year-old pieces of equipment, it'll give us the infrastructure we need to make those further enhancements. Lastly, with our new permit requirements do require us to look at climate change adaptation, and so the new project will be, everything in the new project will be built to mitigate for sea level rise as projected currently for the facility. So we're going to be going over a background of the project, the completed elements, current work, where we're at now, and then the timeline and budget, and then we'll be asking for your recommendation to forward the staff recommendation to council afterwards. So what you see on this slide is kind of the plant-wide view from the design drawings. We're building 5 new electrical buildings, demolishing 4 existing buildings, and all the buried infrastructure between those buildings and all the power use sites in the facility. So while that drawing does show a couple red squares, the entire facility is going to be trenched to run new electrical conduits between it. So this is going to be a exciting while challenging project to implement. So a lot of coordination is going to be required on this project between us and engineering. By us, I mean water resources, engineering, and our design consultants, contractors, and construction support, construction management consultants. One of the other big changes that's not really an electrical asset, it's our waste gas flare. That's a critical piece of safety equipment to have a waste gas flare to flare off gas when we're not using it in the cogen unit. So our cogen unit currently uses almost all of the gas produced by our anaerobic digesters. We're producing about 50% of the power on site currently. And in order to be able to ramp that gas up, either by accepting other waste or trying to optimize the digestion process, we have to upsize the flare. The existing flare is grandfathered in. It doesn't meet all the new emission standards, and the new flare system will have a higher capacity and be a low NOx emissions and meet those low NOx emissions that are being required by the Air Pollution Control District. So even though it's not an electrical asset, it's critical for us to be able to improve that so that we can increase our on-site biogas. All right. So, did I skip a slide? Oh, sorry. Timeline and budget. Right now we're in the approving the contracts phase. We have received bids and we have proposals from our various consultants. Construction project will be getting into notice to proceed in January, February, hopefully timeframe. And then it's going to be a 3-year project. I believe it's 1,150 working days or calendar days project. I'll get into a little bit of the challenges we have with the timeline in a further slide. So what have we already completed? So as I stated earlier, the conceptual part of this project was founded in 2018 during our facility master plan. We completed a preliminary design in 2019. This concept was used for the design review period and was used for our application for the State Water Revolving Fund loan. It helped us identify key challenges to the project and gave us guidance for going into final design. One of the big things is construction sequencing, and so going through the preliminary design and final design phases, trying to sequence the work in a way that we can continue operating the plant while cutting over and putting in new. You can't remove the old and put in the new because this is all electrical equipment, and so a lot of back and forth with our design team. We have a lot of having Laguna Channel right next to our facility creates environmental review that we've had to do as well. And so there was a lot of construction sequencing and just site coordination that needed to occur through this process. The project was, all that was part of our constructability review process. So then we went into bidding. The project was bid in fall of 2023. The bid was protest and required us to go through an arbitration process to resolve. The arbitration decision required us to go back out to bid with a community workforce agreement for this contract. And we had to reject the first bids and go back out to bid, and which is where we are now. The rebid was performed this summer, and bids were received in the beginning of August. The new bid was right around the same cost as the original bid. We're at 33.6 million for the construction cost. And there's a slide later on showing the full project costs. We'll get into that a little bit more. We've negotiated construction support contracts with our construction management manager. They're doing the inspection, and there's a lot of other smaller contracts included in that for like soils remediation. We have a CWA compliance consultant that's also on board for this project. So the last thing we do have a funding agreement for the original SRF loan, and we will be working on an amendment, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we start talking about the funding plan for this project. Next slide, come on. There we go. All right, so what's needed now? Contract approvals, is finalizing those contract approvals. We'll need to go to council. We'll be seeking your recommendation to forward those contracts to council. We'll then be doing notice to proceed probably in January, February 2025. It will take some time to get our contractor on board, and there's some early phase submittals that we need to get ironed out before we can do notice to proceed. And then once we get that notice to proceed, it's going to be a 3-year project to get through. We have some very long lead items that will require phasing in that or extending that timeline. So this just kind of shows our timeline of where we are now, and it's a little misleading. The construction arrow is a little short, but it's compressed. 2025 through 2028 is our kind of projected completion time. But like I said, this has started in 2018. Permitting and funding was ironed out between 2019 and 2022. We did constructability review with our construction management consultant, MEG, in that 2022 to 2023 timeframe. This was a kind of a unique project where we did a pre-qualification and a bid process. So the time frame on here does show the pre-qualification process where we advertised the project and requested proposals from qualified contractors. We vetted those proposals, and then we invited only the approved contractors to bid on the final project. And hopefully January we'll have notice to proceed to start construction process. So the project cost, at this point, the total project cost is $50.6 million. This is the cumulative cost from preliminary design through final design, doing environmental review, constructability review, staff time for permitting. And then one of the unique for us, normally when we go to contract, we request a 10% contingency for change order allowance. Because of the size and scope and opportunities to find conflicts in the field on this project, so we're going to be trenching through a 40-year-old treatment plant, we are seeking a 15% contingency allowance just because of the complexity involved being a bulk electrical project. That is a little bit higher than we normally would seek, but we believe that it's prudent to have that authority now, to have that extra change order allowance. The construction management and construction support contracts are trending higher than other similar projects typically, but part of that is due to the 3-year timeline. All of our consultants will need to be on board for that extra time, and so there is extra overhead due to the long contract period. So we're going to have our construction support for almost 3 years, doing all phases of submittal review, construction inspection. The other part of the project is we are doing our own building and safety inspection. Our consultants will be doing the building and safety inspection as part of their scope as well.
Yeah, typically, a project like this would be overseen by a city building inspector, but this project is so unique and and significant in size that we've worked with our building department to hire an outside third party that will be that person for this project. So it's included in those construction management costs.
Yeah. So moving on to the funding plan for this project, we do have a SRF, a State Revolving Fund Loan, agreement in place. That agreement is for $30.2 million, which is a little less than the 50.6 total costs we're seeing. So we are seeking an amendment to that contract. The Water Resources Department has been in discussion with the state on that, and we've gotten good feedback on whether they will be approving that amendment. Because of wanting to have a contingency plan, we've also started the discussion of potentially seeking a revenue bond if necessary, just to make sure we have funding in place to be able to fund this entire project. We don't have the funds to pay-go this, so debt funding this project. Pay-go would mean like paying it out of our reserves now. And due to the fact that these are long-term improvements that will have a long lifetime, seeking debt funding to amortize the cost of the project over the life of the assets is a little better to help stabilize rates and really have the ratepayers be paying the rates over the life of that asset. So our current rate structure that we did recently assumed a $40 million total project cost. So there's a little bit of adjustments that'll be needing to be made with rates, and I think we're confident that our current rates, as approved, will be sufficient to manage this. But this isn't coming under design where we think we have extra funds built in.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. And we thought we had padded it enough, again, for our rate study. And we've got some wiggle room with this because of the construction schedule on this. Before we have to start paying this back has been pushed back a year from the rate study. So there's some savings there that's going to help with that. We're early on in this process. This is going to add about that $10 million increase here is going to, if we can stay with the SRF, it's going to add about $400,000 a year to our debt service. I think we've got some room to still work with that, but I think it really just, I can drive home really the need for our rates that we have put to the community and will be adopting over the next few years. But we're going to keep a close eye on this. And hopefully we've been conservative enough and other things come in less than we had anticipated.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. If necessary, would the revenue bond, how would that affect our rate issue?
That is a great question. We did get some preliminary numbers. I want to say it's in the 4.5% range. So the difference between 2.6, it would be a significant hit. Again, it would be on 20 million. So we'd get the 30 million at 2.6. So that debt service would probably go from 400,000 to probably 800,000. So that would be pretty significant. Certainly if we run across that, we'll come back to the commission and talk some more about how that looks. Right now, I mean, again, it's just staff conversations. They seemed optimistic they'll be able to fund the additional 20 million.
Will that financing be figured out before the October 1st council meeting, or probably not?
No. And that's the uncomfortable part of this whole thing. Certainly, we have enough authorization to get the project started and get going. But yeah, we've got some decisions that need to come together. So yeah, it is a very uncomfortable spot to be in. I think we have a plan. We just don't know exactly what that final dollar amount will be.
And when do you hear back on the SRF?
They're not the speediest. I want to say it was like a 6-month. Is that what it is?
Hello, Gabrielle Cook, Water Resources Financial Officer. So it can take about 2 to 8 months. So we have to submit a new budget to SRF, and then they need to review it, approve it. That takes a couple months. And then to get the executed agreement, that takes another good 6 to 8 months. So overall, it's about a year and a half process to get an amendment.
But we should know what the.
But we should know within a couple months, within 2 to 4 months of submitting the final budget approval.
Yeah.
So definitely can't wait for that to get sorted out before.
Right. Yeah. In an ideal world, yeah, you'd wait for that. And the fact that the Fed is dropping the rates too, that will help, I think, with the bond costs as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question, Chair. So if you look at $30 million, right, that would be the loan amount at this time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And at 2.6%, the initial year's interest payments are going to be a little under $800,000? Am I looking at that correctly?
Sure.
Right. And so what does that curve look like? And this is going to be amortized, right, over 30 years?
Right. We have a fully built out schedule that kind of shows how it curves up. And what's interesting on these is we don't pay interest until we finish the project. So it's kind of it's not the same for water, but for wastewater, you don't pay interest during construction.
Right.
So we won't have any interest or debt service payment until the project is finished, which I've told staff, just don't finish the project. We're all good here. But in theory, we at the end of the 3 years, we would start to then have to make those payments.
You may have mentioned this, but so what would the total debt service be? Just the interest component?
We have that, and we could share that with you. And I don't know that I have that with me now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because I'm just curious how much that adds to, I mean, that's built into the numbers we're seeing here, right? But I can't, I don't see where it is under project costs.
No, the debt service is not shown here. So the debt service, that was in our rate study, that, I don't know, it's 2-point-something million every year would be our debt and interest payments every year.
Why isn't that added onto the project cost?
These are the physical costs. We do not, the interest rate is not captured in here.
Okay.
I think it's just basically saying that is the project cost.
It is.
And disclosure to the council and the public why that isn't at least included. So what the total project cost, burden would be.
Right, no, that's a good question. Good. We typically don't do that, but one of the challenges, especially with that particular interest rate, is inflation typically exceeds that 2.6%. So how do you talk about those together as well? Like the value of that project is going to diminish just due to inflation. So it feels like, how do you have a good conversation about that, what it actually means to pay that interest rate over time? I mean, we can certainly calculate what it is. We probably have a
But
table with that.
Excuse me, but we've kind of had that discussion when we were looking at the rates, because in fact, we were showing what our debt service would be over time, including these large projects, at least over the period of the 10 years that we're looking at it. So
Right.
I think we've had at least a 30,000-foot level discussion of that.
Correct. It is a specific line item in our rate
Correct.
study that says the funding for this project. So yeah, it's in there.
And you included this project specifically as one of the big bumps that was going to come
Yeah.
early on. I remember that.
Right, and we pay, and I forget which one it is, but we pay off one of our other SRFs in 2028, 2029. So something's coming off as this one's going to
It's
come
coming
on.
on.
Yeah.
All right. So in summary, with that, we've completed the multi-year design and permitting process, and we have secured at least the initial loan to support the project, gone through our constructability review and building permit review process. We've developed and implemented the pre-qualification and bidding process. That's complete. And we've prepared all the necessary support contracts and are ready to implement the contract. We have 3 years of construction ahead of us, so even though our design engineers are very excited we're complete with the design phase, the construction engineers will be ready to, are just starting their work, and the operations teams are just starting their work with this 3-year construction period.
So one of the unique things that's Driver, maybe you can talk about some of the pieces of equipment that I think have some pretty extraordinary delivery times.
Yeah, there's, electrical transformers are about 100-week lead time is what I'm hearing. Yeah, so pretty much 2 years from your order date. And so that'll be one of the first things we review when we get, once we issue notice to proceed is issue those, review those submittals from the contractor, approve the transformers so that they can place those orders. With all the site work and the buildings that need to be built, it is a long time out, but there's a lot of work that can be done until those transformers arrive. The motor control centers and switch gears are also in that close to 1 year time frame. So there's this electrical equipment, the supply chain issues that we've been experiencing since COVID are still rampant in the construction and industrial supply industry. So unfortunately, that'll be a challenge for us. And so we're seeing that with our Braemar project as well, long lead times. We saw that with the recycled water pump station we did last year. And so we're confident that extending the project timeline was the right thing to make sure that we build that into the schedule.
Do you know when physical work on site will start?
I haven't seen a date from the contractor yet, but I have to assume it'll be probably in the next summer is when they'll probably start mobilizing. There's a lot of trenching and site work that's going to need to occur. So we're hoping they spread it out so that we're not, we only impact parts of the plant at a time, and we're not trenching the entire facility. We still have an operation to run, and we have other. We do fats, oils, and grease receiving. We have brine receiving. Our collections crews are co-located on site, so we have a lot of coordination that still needs to occur. So, traffic management is going to be a major component of this. So, trying to spread the work apart to maintain access to the facility will be critical. We're working on the funding amendment, and if we're not able to secure the full project cost, we'll look at either that a loan, or there is a portion of the project that's already been paid for. We've paid for design, and so we may not seek full loan or debt service for the project for the work that's already been completed. That 50.6 includes the approximately $5 million of design and design review and preliminary design work that's already been completed. If we seek that 50.6, that would repay us that $5 million. That money would either go into reserves for future debt service, or would go into reserves or the CIP fund for other construction activities for the wastewater fund. So
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask the question. When you look back at slide 13, when you talk about exploring options to mitigate the impacts, is that what you're implying?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the other component is, as part of the SRF loan, you have to build up 1 year's worth of payments, and you need to have that on hand. I believe you have 10 years to do that. So that's another use. When we get that design money back, we could put that in there, and then we don't have to every year put away money for that extra payment. So.
And then lastly, we do anticipate coming back to Water Commission with updates throughout the project as needed. And of course, when construction's completed, we'll have a report back to the commission as well. So at this point, we are seeking a recommendation to move this to council with the staff's recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions or comments before we?
Yes.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So the three bids that came in, there's an $11 million difference between the high and the low.
Yeah.
So, and that's like 1/3 of the contract price of the $33 million. Seems like, a pretty big number to me. Do we, at this juncture, do we have consultants helping us to analyze why that is so? I mean, why that bid is so much higher?
Yeah, I definitely had that same concern. What gives us some hope is that this is the second time we bid it. Last time we bid it, we had, the low bidder came in at 34 million, so this is right in there. And then we also at that time had a bidder that was in the low 40s. So we do believe project is viable at this point. The contractor is confident behind it. We reached out to them. So they said they're solid. We can do this project for this cost. How you explain the cost for those other contractors? They're all out of town, which is the challenge with this. This is a complicated work, not something you'd typically find in Santa Barbara. So all these folks are coming up from LA, San Diego to do this project.
But when you get a bid like this, do you go through?
Line item by line item.
Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
do they give you sufficient information
Yeah.
that you can dissect it
Yes.
and determine where they're high?
Right. Yeah, we could see exactly what bid units were, how they approached them, some different than others. But yes.
So what did you determine was the reason why that one was at 44 million, $11 million more? Were they using higher labor rates? Was it
So-
construction materials?
With this contractor is primarily an electrical contractor, and so some of the other contractors had different focuses. So with this contractor being the primary contractor, they're subbing out the electrical work. Some of the other contractors were subbing out more of the electrical work. And so, did I say that backwards?
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
we got
They're
it.
prime electrical contractor, they're subbing out some of the concrete work, and the other contractors were subbing out some of the electrical work. And so having the prime being an electrical contractor was, I believe, why the electrical work was coming in at a lower cost. One of the big drivers was it was miscellaneous electrical site work, and the other two bids had big contingency numbers in their in relation to the low bid. But they weren't the low bid on every single item. They were close on some items, and the other contractors had higher numbers than others. So it did look, believable, and they covered out all their bases on it. There was, depending on the size of the contractor, there was wide variations in just mobilization costs, and that number rolled up pretty high on the two other bidders.
And do they show you what they expect to be their net profit? They don't? Okay. All right. And what
We
was
do have an engineer's estimate, and I don't know if Ms. Shu can speak to that, like how we put together an engineer's estimate before this went out, and what we kind of build in some type of profit on these, but I don't recall how did these costs come in compared to the engineer's estimate?
Commissioners, Ashley Sizo, Principal Engineer with the Public Works Department. I don't have it right in front of me, but yes, we do a very detailed analysis comparing the bids to not only the engineer's estimate, but then against all of the other bids that have come in. And we don't include a specific line item for profit, but that is built, those assumptions are built into the unit prices that go into the engineer's estimate. But we don't know at the end of the day what a contractor's profit off a particular line item or project will be.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. In both bids, was it the same low bidder?
No.
No, different. So that's interesting. Again, Jeff, here they both came in at 30-something, right, in terms of two different bid processes. That would make me feel a little bit more comfortable that, in fact, it was legitimate.
The other interesting part is, when we bid it last time, you were not required to be a union contractor, so the low bidder in that case was a non-union shop. This time around, they had to be union shops, and this particular electrical contractor, who is main electrical contractor, came in, fairly close to the non-union.
Great, thank you.
Just on the recommendation, there's item F, which I don't really understand what that means. Could someone explain what that means?
Oh, I'm glad you picked that out. Yes, so this is now a finance department requirement to clarify any expenditures, that they have to be done by resolution. And I can, if you want more detail on that, I can bring Gabrielle to talk about that, but it's a finance requirement.
Remember certain expenses.
Yes.
I recommend that, yeah.
I wanted to just come back to the financing component and just talk about how that is going to be reflected to council and discussed with council, because it doesn't like pop out in the staff report. And so I was just wondering, like, is there going to be a conversation about like what the different costs might look like, or what the debts might look like if we don't get the SRF amendment, or like how is that going to be discussed with council, given that we're not going to be able to have that decision made ahead of time?
Great question. Given the busy council agenda, I think this is going to be a consent item.
Okay.
So that's why I really wanted the opportunity to bring this to your attention and talk about this, to the opportunities you have to talk with council. I just don't know if an opportunity is given, I'm sure we'd be happy to present to them, but we don't dictate the agenda on this one. But yes, this is one of those, it's significant to us, and it could have major ramifications down the road. We will have more conversations about this, particularly once we figure out the financing support. But yeah, what are the long-term impacts? That I think is the kind of the challenge, is how do we keep the council informed on that?
Madam Chair, just as an idea, under budget financial information, add a very short paragraph which indicates there are some variables which are unsure of in terms of these things, and that could have implications which we'd have to return back to Water Commission and Council to discuss.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I like the sound of that. And then I also had a question, which maybe is for another time when you come back to Water Commission with this, just around like how you're going to maintain continuity of operations of El Estero during this project, like with the electricity, but also just all the disruption. But maybe that's a question for another meeting.
That was discussed heavily during the preliminary design and constructability reviews. And so the short story is we're building all new first, and then we're going to cut over individual process areas to the new system, and then all the demo will happen on the tail end. So it will, we tried to say when we did our aeration project that we were like replacing the heart of the plant, and I don't know how to describe it differently. It's the different heart of the plant, but there's provisions for temporary on-site generators for certain areas that can't be cut over immediately. So working with the contractor to secure that temporary power for some of those cutovers will be really critical. What we learned during the last aeration project when we replaced some of the high voltage pieces of equipment is it's not like your house, you're unplugging a 120 volt outlet and plugging it in somewhere else, or even replacing a breaker in your house. The termination and the electrical work that occurs on this high voltage equipment, some of it takes 12 hours to literally just remove the cable from one and reconnect the cable to the other, because they have to take the cables, there's insulation that's inches thick around it, and re-insulate the cables. And so that's where the temporary power is going to be critical, because we'll be able to take the local power source, put it on emergency power, or that we have currently, or contractor provided emergency power to do those cutovers. So that's, it's easy for me to say right now, but we're confident that the contractor and our operations team will be able to handle that.
And this will impact cogen, so there will be times we'll have to take cogen off. And given our contract with them, we'll have some obligation to continue to pay them, even though they won't be producing anything. So that's why the flare is so important, to have that up and running as well. So, boy, just a lot of moving pieces on this. Yeah, I'm glad we have Thomas and his team. They're fully invested in this one.
Any other questions or comments? So I'm going to make a recommendation
Public
with
comment.
that. Oh, yes, thank you. Any public comment?
No public comment.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move staff recommendation with the addition of a short or the direction of adding a short paragraph regarding potential financing issues and mitigations, as we discussed.
I'll second it.
All right, Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Keller,
Yes.
Chair Snyder.
Yes. Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welsh. Moving on to item 6B, the adopted state board regulations for water conservation.
Good afternoon again, Water Commission. My name is Dakota Corey, and I'm the Water Supply and Services Manager for the city. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce this item for you. But before that, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this or if it's out of process, but Chair Snyder, you had asked a question on the consent calendar about the special board meeting, and I recognize now that you were probably asking about CCWA and the temporary contract, not CCRB. Both agencies had special board meetings in September, so.
Yes, I was referring to CCWA.
So the CCWA board meeting was not held in closed session, and they did adopt the temporary contract with the 3% conveyance loss included. And the board also decided unanimously to adopt sending a letter along with the signed agreement stating that we don't want the 3% conveyance loss to be precedent setting for future contracts, and that we need to work collaboratively with Reclamation to iron out how we calculate loss in the future based on actual data.
Thank you.
So then, moving on to the adopted state board regulations for water conservation. As you know, this has been a long time coming, and our city staff has been involved in the process since the beginning. And so we've attended state board hearings, we've made comments and written letters, we've helped pilot some of the different opportunities for forming the targets, and I think to the city's benefit, participation in that process has gone well. Just a little bit of a spoiler alert. These regulations won't have huge implications in terms of being a driving force for the water conservation here at the city, but we do need to stay the course with water conservation. And what's cool about today's agenda is we have 3 items that are all going to kind of interrelate. This one being the first with the state board regulations, and then we're going to talk about the water affordability program and water efficiency 2.0, and kind of how these forces are all driving to send us in a new direction in my group, in the water supply and services group. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Wood and Ms. Showers, and they're going to dive into the details of the new requirements and where the city currently stands.
Good afternoon, Chair Snyder and Commissioners. My name is Jasmine Showers. Is it still not on? It's on now. Oh, thanks. And I'll be starting the presentation with an overview of the regulation and a history, and then going into the objective standards, and then our specific city calculations and how we stand compared to those standards. And then I'll pass the presentation over to Ms. Wood, and she'll talk about the commercial, industrial, and institutional, or CII, performance measures, the reporting requirements, and then city actions taken and next steps. So a brief overview of the regulation. The official title is Make Water Conservation a California Way of Life. And this was adopted July 3rd of this year by the State Water Resources Control Board, or State Board. And we usually refer to this as the regulation framework or just the framework. And this implements Assembly Bill 1668 and Senate Bill 606, which were both originally passed in 2018. So it has been a really long time coming. The primary goal of the framework is to achieve long-term water use efficiency. And this is especially in response to climate change and the expected longer and more frequent droughts. And the big difference with this framework regulation in comparison to other water conservation regulations is it moves away from a mandatory % reduction in water use. Instead, urban water providers will calculate a provider-wide water use objective, and the state calls this the objective standards. The framework also includes some CII water use performance measures. I'll spend the next few slides talking about the objective standards first, and then go over the city calculations. For calculating the urban water use objective, or that UWUO, providers cannot exceed the sum of the objective standards. And there is a little caveat to that for water loss, which I'll speak to in a later slide. In general, the objective standards are indoor residential, outdoor residential, CII dedicated irrigation meters, or DIMs, water loss budget, and then the framework does spend a lot of time. It includes a lot of variances, temporary provisions, and a bonus. For example, providers can get a bonus to their overall objective if they have potable reuse. We don't expect to need to qualify or to need to calculate any of those extra things or qualify for them.
There's a potential for desal to play a part in that. I know Montecito Water District is pushing to have that included, but when we looked at it, we didn't feel like we needed it at this time.
Thank you. So starting with the indoor residential standard, this is a simple calculation made up of the indoor standard in gallons per capita per day, times our service area population, times days per year. And the indoor standard was passed by legislature in 2022. So it starts at 55 GPCD, and then throughout the compliance years goes down to 42 GPCD. The outdoor standard is much more complicated. The calculation is made up of supplier's unique climate times our landscaped area and times the landscape efficiency factor. And the part of this calculation that really changes over time is the landscape efficiency factor, or the LEF. It starts from 2023 to 2034 at 0.08 LEF, which is most like a well-watered lawn, and then ramps down to 0.55 in 2040. And just as a reminder, the landscaped area part of this is from the Department of Water Resources did a flyover of the state in 2018 and 2019, and the purpose was to map all of the residential irrigated landscaped area, and then they delivered that to every provider. And we received our data in January of 2021, and we did spend a long time double checking that data because it's a really important part of this calculation. And we did offer some corrections to the state. And the next objective standard is commercial irrigation meters, those CII DIMs. And this includes the same calculation that I just went over in the previous slide. And the LEF here is different. Starting in 2028, it's at 0.8, and then it ramps down to 0.45. And the reason it starts in 2028 is that the state hasn't delivered our landscaped area for this. They do expect to deliver that to providers in 2027, even though it's still unclear exactly what we will be receiving. So prior to 2028, we actually will report our actual water use, which is interesting. Our budget equals our exact use prior to that. So we're looking forward to actually being able to calculate that, because then we have the opportunity to have water savings in that area. And the last objective standard is water loss. And water loss is unique. It was actually passed by a previous legislation, SB 555 in 2015. And then the individual standard was set in 2022. So this means that it can be enforced individually. With other parts of the calculation, we can be a little under or a little over. But with water loss, we have to meet it at every compliance period. And then we are given a provider standard, which is in gallons per connection per day. We'll multiply that by our service area connections and then times days in the year. And our water loss standard is 28.8, and that won't change as far as we know. We must meet this by January of 2028, and then compliance is reassessed every 3 years. And as of our last water loss audit, we are meeting this standard. That was based in fiscal year 2023. And there'll be more information about water loss and our water loss control strategic plan in a later presentation today. And important for the city is that the framework includes an anti-backsliding provision. And this stipulates that the UWUO cannot be higher than any other previously adopted water conservation regulation. So most relevant for us is the Water Conservation Act of 2009, the SB 7x7. And that set an overall citywide target of 90 GPCD. So even if we go through all the work of calculating our UWUO, if it's over 90, we have to use 90. And this shows our city calculations by objective standard, and then for each compliance period. And I'll just talk about the last 3 columns there that are outlined in the light blue box. We have our calculated UWUO, and it actually would start at 110 GPCD and then ramps down to 84 GPCD. But if you look at the second column, that shows that 90 GPCD cap. So you can see we'll be kept at the 90 cap from 2024 until 2036. And then for context, I have our 10-year average regulatory GPCD, and that's 75. So you can see that we have a good cushion and confidence that we'll be able to meet these regulations. And finally, I have a slide that you're familiar with. I know you've been receiving this for the past year, and this shows our GPCD over time. I just wanted to direct your attention to 2 changes here. Now that the framework has been adopted, the red dashed line that shows our 2024 budget is now showing that 90 GPCD cap. And then the orange dashed line is the last year of the framework, so 2041, and that's showing 84 GPCD. And we do plan to continue to calculate it on a monthly basis and provide that to you, but it's not part of this presentation. And with that, I will pass it to Ms. Wood.
Just before Ms. Wood
sorry.
begins, I just wanted to really commend the city for the fact that we're already so far below the standard and just the incredible conservation efforts of you all in the community, because there's a lot of agencies that we're really fighting tooth and nail saying this is way too ambitious and way too hard, we can't possibly do it. And for the city, it's like, okay, we're here, we've done it. And so I just want to give kudos to that.
Thank you.
Chair Snyder and members of the commission, my name's Madeline Wood. I'm the water conservation analyst, and in my slides I'll be going through some of the more qualitative portions of the regulation. And separate from the objectives that Ms. Showers presented on, these performance measures for commercial, institutional, and industrial, as we're calling them, CII, they are needing to be met separately, essentially. And the point of these measures, it's hard to quantify commercial water use across the state. Every service area is very different. There's not really an apples to apples comparison here. So the direction that they took is to do performance measures that are intended to enable water usage benchmarking across different industry types and to establish best management practices for those commercial water uses, both indoor and outdoor. So I'll be presenting on the regulations, and then I'll present on the actions the city has taken and will be taking to based on these requirements. So to start, we will need to identify our CII buildings that have 50,000 square feet or larger gross floor area. The California Energy Commission refers to those as disclosable buildings, and that group of buildings is already under a requirement from the California Energy Commission to report to them on their energy usage. So we will need to identify these buildings and then supply them with their detailed water use information upon request. The idea behind this is since those buildings are already required to use a platform called Energy Star Portfolio Manager to report on energy use, there's already a setup process to then report on water use, and that helps with the water energy nexus. The next portion is that we will need to classify our commercial accounts into one of 22 categories that are based on the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and I have them on this slide right here. So these are to start, the first 18 are the categories in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, so these are nationwide. The 4 that are in italics are the 4 that were added by the state board regulation for tracking in California specifically. And as you can see, those are some of the more water-intensive industries that were added and sort of separated out from the other 18. So rather than just having our accounts sort of in the broad commercial account type category, essentially it's sub-classifying them into one of these industry types. We'll also need to identify all of the commercial large landscapes that are irrigated with a meter that serves both indoor and outdoor uses. They're called mixed-use meters, and the regulation establishes that if it's over half of an acre of irrigated area, that's technically a large landscape, so that they would fall into that category. And for those properties, we either need to employ an in-lieu technology, luckily AMI accounts for that, and work with them on best management practices for that site, or convert them to a dedicated irrigation meter that's going to serve just the landscape and a separate one for indoor. And this portion of the regulation, I like to call the choose your own adventure portion. And so for the remaining buckets of water, essentially, they want us to identify our highest users in the commercial sector and work with them on best management practices. So first we need to identify the top 20% and implement best management practices for those. And then the top 2.5% get additional BMPs. And based on the prioritization and the timeline that each supplier chooses, you can have a lower reporting burden, essentially. So we are planning to go through the fast track option, which means we have to come into compliance quicker, but it's a lower reporting burden overall. Some of the BMP options include operational measures, landscape programs, incentives, training, collaboration. They're all outlined in the regulation. All right, the fun stuff, reporting requirements. So although we anticipate continuing to meet our urban water use objective, this long-term framework does necessitate significant staff time for reporting. And we have already been experiencing that because the monthly reports have changed. So now monthly we're reporting on the status of all our sources, production, demand, conservation actions. That's already going to the state board. And now we will have a new annual report. So the first post-adoption reporting deadline will be January of 2025. The legislation that was enacted in 2018 actually included a 2024 requirement for reporting. So we did have an interim report that we did submit in good faith, even though the regulations were not adopted yet. So now this is actually the official reporting will be in January of 2025. We do not have the reporting form yet. We have heard it will hopefully be next month, so we are eagerly waiting for that. Once we get that form, we will then report by January 1st. And then beginning in January 1st, 2027 is when the water suppliers need to demonstrate compliance with these objective standards. And if it's not met, there is enforcement actions that are laid out in the regulations. And that enforcement action is a phased approach. It starts with warnings, but it can progress to fines. All right. So, city actions. So we have been tracking and participating in this process pretty heavily for the last 4 years. We participated in the initial regulation recommendations that were carried out by the Department of Water Resources from 2020 to 2022. Ms. Showers presented at the state board meeting in October of last year to give an overview of our conservation program, how we measure up with the objectives. And we also had an opportunity to provide recommendations to the board, and one of which they did implement, which was great. We also participated in editing the final regulation text for the CII performance measures at the end of last year. And as you see from your packets each month, we've been tracking our monthly urban water use objective. And additionally, we invested significant staff time in classifying those commercial accounts. So we have 2,750 CII accounts. We classified them through 2022 and 2023. So they are in those 22 categories, as I showed on the screen. We've also, as an early implementer of that, we've been able to help other suppliers with that endeavor and share some of our lessons learned, and also contribute to the classification guidebook that is being developed with the California Water Efficiency Partnership. In terms of those large landscapes, the ones that are serving over a half of an acre that aren't a mixed-use meter, we've done some initial GIS analysis to find those properties and put them on our handy-dandy list. And we're also working with WaterSmart, which is our customer portal, to work on some ability to display data and present data to those disclosable buildings that need it. All right. And although the city is already in compliance with some of the current and future standards, really the long-term framework does underpin that we need to stay the course with community water conservation. And I want to take a moment, as Commissioner Snyder did, to really thank the community for their water conservation efforts, and to thank the Water Commission and Council for their leadership in this sphere, so that we can be poised to not only better withstand droughts, but also meet state regulations as they come down the pike. So currently we do have full water supplies, and our community continues to conserve. But as we know, the next drought is always around the next corner, and really the relationship we've built with our community puts us in a great position for where we are today with these regulations. So our next steps will be to report when we get that form, turn it in by January 1st. And then we're also working on development of a water loss control strategic plan and evaluating our current and additional commercial best management practices as part of a water conservation technical analysis. And both of those items will be discussed further in item 6D. And we're here for any questions.
A quick question. So for some residential communities that, for example, have a homeowner association and there's several homes and they have a common landscape area, where do they fall? They're still within the residential, but the household has a different meter. So how does that work out on those cases?
So it depends on their metering setup. Some of them have a dedicated irrigation meter for those common areas. That's the most typical situation that we see. And those, with our mapping exercise, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Showers, those are not part of an identified parcel at the county level, those HOA common areas. And that's a problem statewide for all suppliers because, as we know, it's almost always lawn. So we actually didn't get credit for those. Yeah. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but it's a problem.
That was part of the recommended corrections we submitted to the state, and those were not accepted. Some of our parcels that do belong to HOAs were included automatically, but if they're one of the parcels that isn't owned technically, then they weren't included, unfortunately.
I have a question. So the city just needs to maintain its average GPCD below a certain number. Within the city itself, with parcel owners, if there are parcel owners that are above the average, is there any mechanism you're predicting to try to bring them into better compliance?
If you're referring to regulatory, then I just want to be clear that this standard is specific to the whole community, and that there has been some confusion about that in the past in the media, saying, people they're going to be held to the 55 gallons per capita per day, and that's not how this is actually played out. It's really at a community-wide level. If you're asking about internal processes, we do have ways to communicate and offer help to customers who are using way above what we believe their parcel or their household mix should use, but there is no regulatory compliance that's needed on a parcel level.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just following up on that, and I got a little confused, or maybe I didn't. When you look at CII, and I'm looking at the staff report on page 2, it's in slide 40. Identify the large landscapes over 0.5 that are irrigated, and then implement best management practices. That reads to be implementation, regulatory, parcel specific. Am I missing that wrong, or reading that wrong?
That's a good question, and this is something that we did provide a lot of feedback to the state board on, because as our role of water suppliers, we can only offer services. We can't force rebates on people. We can't force people to take part in our rebate. So when we implement the best management practices, we need to offer a lot of support to these properties, essentially. We need to have programs available for them to take advantage of and do continual outreach to them. The hope is to try to engage them to participate with us in the programs that we can offer them. So we are required to identify all of them, for sure. And then in terms of how they come into compliance, they don't have to get a dedicated irrigation meter, because honestly, these properties generally don't have one for a reason, because it doesn't pencil out for them. It's not going to be cost effective for them to change all of their on-site plumbing to separate indoor and outdoor usage. And so we, as the water supplier, are required to have programs available to help them use water more efficiently. Just because it's half of an acre or more that's irrigated also doesn't mean it's inefficiently irrigated, and that's one of the issues there.
I just point that when I read, and again, I've worked in regulation for a lot of years, implement best management practices, that's a directive rather than incentivize. If it was incentivize, the use of, the wording would be more descriptive, because when I read this, it is regulatory, you're going to need local legislation, and then you're going to need enforcement. That's not what you're talking about, but I think it presents in a different way.
Correct. It's implement for us. We need to implement the best management practices.
Yeah, okay. So again, just for when you present later, or to the council or whoever, what was my other point? Oh, enforcement generally, okay? On the global scale or city scale, right? What is the state water board's implement or enforcement if we don't meet the standard?
So it's a phased approach that starts with, I believe it's called a conservation order, which is probably some sort of written decree of when they need to come into compliance. I've also heard they're going to offer more technical assistance to help folks get into compliance, but the highest level, essentially, of enforcement is fines, and I believe it's $10,000 a day if there is no compliance by the supplier, which is phased over years. And from what they've said, they, of course, hope to not get to that point, but they do have that. It's part of the legislation that was passed.
Great, thank you very much.
I had a question, just curious. So you mentioned with the CII customers and having data on the WaterSmart portal. Is there any sort of interface between the Energy Star portfolio manager and WaterSmart?
At this point, there isn't, but that's what we've been working with them on, is you can download the templates from Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and we're showing them sort of how the output is supposed to look, to see if that's something that they then on the WaterSmart portal can have something similar where you can download your data and then it gets uploaded into Energy Star Portfolio Manager.
Got it. And on the CII classifications, or like the sub-classifications, I know that there was conversation about, is that then like the billing system? And so are you guys changing your billing system with those classifications, or is it just for the state reporting?
So it is in our billing system because that's where we house almost everything. So we want it to be helpful. So they are still just commercial. That's what it'll say on their bill, and that's what it is at a high level. But the subclassifications are in our billing system, so we can run various reports on them.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I have a question for him. One of the most painful things that we had to live through in the drought was these arbitrary reduce your usage by 10%. What is this going to mean when we do hit that next drought? What kind of messaging are we going to get from the state? If we are in compliance with this, are they still going to slap on some arbitrary number that we have to hit?
That's a very good question. Right before it rained in 2019, when did it last rain? When we got our first big winter, one of the proposals was to ramp up the timeline of this considerably. There is a chance that they would go in that direction. I think it just depends on the whims of the governor and the state board at the time. I haven't actually, now that it's rained, no one's actually talking about drought that much at a state level, so I'm not sure what carrots or sticks they would be trying to implement. Yeah, we'll see. That has been some of our feedback in the past, is when this was still proposed and they were coming down with additional across the board X percentage reductions. This is the scalpel, not just the big hammer. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the next drought will pretend.
I think it's worth noting one of the reasons, we've been successful was we've been at this for a long time. In the next presentation, you'll just see how much we've been at, how many households we've been to and been talking water conservation with. And I think the other part that's a little more difficult to communicate is that we have a rate structure that really incentivizes people to make those decisions. And that's the tough one that's no one likes, but it really is. I mean, it makes a big difference in whether or not you tear out that lawn or do something different in your house. And when the cost incentives are there, it just makes sense. Yeah.
Is there any public comment?
Chair Snyder, we have no speakers for public comment.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, moving on to item 6C is the water affordability study follow-up.
Madam Chair, would you like to take a 10-minute break?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's do that. Thank you. and move on to the water affordability study follow-up.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, excited to have this brought back to you today. And as we'll get into the presentation, you probably saw in the staff report, really, there's some things that are just super clear to us we're doing. Really struggling in some areas on just how exactly to move some of this forward, particularly in light of financial challenges that we're having and the rates that we have. So hopefully with today, we've got a lot of slides to get through, just showing what we have been able to kind of pull out of all the data that we have, and hoping for a thoughtful conversation, maybe some direction, and certainly this could be just the beginning of a conversation. We can keep coming back and talking about it, but as you'll notice today, staff are just, we just need some help here.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Snyder and Commissioners. My name is Gabrielle Cook, and I'm the Water Resources Financial Officer. I'm joined today by Jasmine Showers, one of our Water Resources Analysts, and we are going to present on the follow-up to the Water Affordability Study recommendations. But before we get started, I did want to acknowledge the great work of Ms. Wood, Ms. Hoppenberg, Ms. Corey, and of course Ms. Showers, because this is really a collaborative effort. It's not just in finance, it's not just in conservation, it's all of us together. Oops. Okay, so here is the outline of the presentation. We will start a little bit with the background and then do a status update on the recommendations, then then move to the implementation of the recommendations and conclude with a discussion on a bill assistance program and the challenges that we are facing. In spring of 23, staff initiated the Water Affordability and Conservation Study with the Alliance for Water Efficiency. The study analyzed both single and multifamily residential customers and how much of a financial burden the water and wastewater bills were on households, and this was done at the census tract. The study found that when evaluated as a whole, the city had little affordability concerns for water. However, when viewed by the census tract, certain tracts were more burdened by water affordability. The study set forth recommendations to improve affordability, and staff presented the prioritized list of recommendations to Water Commission this March. This slide shows the highest priority recommendations identified at that March Water Commission meeting. The priorities were determined based on several factors, including items already being implemented, ease of implementation, and items that will take more time to develop and are more complex. The first two recommendations on this list, they have a little check mark, so that means that we have completed them, and we will go into detail further in the presentation. The staff are currently working on the next set, the in-progress items. So we're working on those recommendations that focus on outreach strategies. And then the final two recommendations are in development, and we are looking for a little bit of guidance today on how to move forward with those final two recommendations that focus more on addressing affordability challenges. And there's going to be a couple of questions posed at the end of this presentation that we hope to have a good discussion with you on. So we're now going to go a little bit more into detail about the recommendations that were completed. The first being leveraging the AMI data to target water conservation. The affordability report was released prior to the citywide launch of WaterSmart in March of 24. And WaterSmart is the city's customer-facing portal in which account holders can access hourly, daily, weekly, and monthly water use, and they can pay bills online, receive automated water leak alerts, and more. So something to note is that this tool is relevant to individually metered customers. So customers in master metered multifamily residences are not able to use this tool. One of the most impactful components of Water Smart is the ability to recognize and automatically alert customers of continuous water use, which usually indicates a leak. Early detection and alerting can prompt the customer to make leak repairs quickly, reducing the higher bill charges associated with the increased water use. Within the first 5 months of the Water Smart rollout, the billing adjustments that are granted to customers experiencing a leak have dropped by more than 50%. So that's in terms of the number of adjustments granted, the average dollar amount of the billing adjustment, as well as the average volume of water lost due to the leaks. So staff is really pleased with the success of AMI thus far. The next recommendation that we've worked on and implemented was an assessment of historical participation in water resources programs. So this included both financial assistance programs and water conservation programs. And data from the last 20 years was analyzed and mapped by census tract. So we're going to show you a couple of these maps. We are going to set the stage with our first two maps. So this map is of the multifamily residential density. In the darker blue areas, it's the higher density in the city. So you can see that the downtown corridor has the highest density. This map shows the Poverty Prevalence Indicator, or PPI. This was a metric used in the affordability report. And PPI is the percent of households that are at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. So for reference, in 2021, a family of four, that would be a household income of $53,000. So the higher the PPI, it's the lower the household income. So you can see that in general, the lower income tracts are also the higher density tracts. This map shows the residential financial assistance recipient locations. In the past couple years, the city participated in two major federal and state financial programs. These programs were the Low Income Household Water Assistance Program, or LEWAP, and the other was the California Water and Wastewater Arrearages Program. So this map shows the participation in both of those programs. LEWAP is in that brighter green color, and the arrearages is in the darker green color. A key distinction between these two programs is that LEWAP was an income qualified program, while the arrearages program had no income limitations. So overall, you can see the participation in both programs is throughout the city, but there's a slightly bigger cluster in the lower income tracts. Oops. Okay. So this table shows the amount of funding and the number of residential customer accounts that received funding. And so I wanted to bring your attention to that LIWAP number. The accounts that participated were 156. We think that this could potentially be a little bit lower because participants that were eligible for LIWAP may have participated in that first round of arrearages, which took place in 2022, and LIWAP took place in 2023. And then this is just another way to look at the data. So this map shows the residential financial assistance recipient data, where the different sized dots represent the different percentages of participation within each census tract. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Ms. Showers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Snyder, Commissioners. Again, my name is Jasmine Showers, and Water Resources Analyst, and I'll be going over the analysis we did for historical participation in water conservation. And we looked at 4 different categories of water conservation programs. The first we looked at are Water Smart residential registrations. So this is a simple map showing every Water Smart residential location in the city. We had, as of September 9th, we had over 11,000 residential registrations. And when we fold in the commercial into that, we're at a registration rate of 43%, which is impressive. This map shows the percent of residential registrations as compared to residential water accounts per census tract. And this is layered over the PPI map. So as you can see, there is higher concentrations or higher percentages in the yellow and green PPI areas of the map. But I also think it's important to note the range in data here. The low range is 37%. And this greatly outweighs our internal goal of 10% registration. So that it does go from 37% to 71% with fairly good participation throughout the city.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
It doesn't differentiate between multifamily and single family, and I'm just curious, knowing the density areas, that, how do I say this? Have we noticed the fact that multifamily is not using it like single family do?
Yeah, that is a great question. We were curious about that as well. So maybe I'll just skip forward a little bit. So this, we started to see kind of the same trend as we were going throughout these.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got ahead of yourself. You're going there already, so.
Oh, okay. Do you want to just wait for it?
I'll wait for it.
Okay. All right, I'll back up. Yeah. Oops, if I can. Previous. Okay, so the next set of conservation programs we looked at are water checkups. And this is our most popular water conservation program. This is the program where customers can call in if they think they're experiencing a leak, and it's free, and customers also use it to just ask general questions. So from 2004 to 2024, we had 12,590 water checkups throughout the city. And this does show good spread, especially in the residential areas of the city. And one thing to note is that this is just total count. So some accounts would use this program multiple times. Yeah.
No, sorry. On the total checkups, roughly, is it fairly consistent over the 20 years, or has it increased in the recent years? Because 20 years is a long period just to understand, what's happening.
Yeah, there were definitely more participation during drought years, and then it did drop off a lot during COVID. During COVID, we also switched from in-person to phone consultations as well. And this map shows the percent of residential checkups, again, compared to total residential accounts per census tract. And then it's again laying over that PPI map. And so we're starting to see that similar trend that I think you have already noticed, where we do have higher participation in the yellow and green census tract areas. And this range of data is from 24% to 96% per census tract.
Which I think reflects discretionary use, outdoor water use. The larger the parcel, typically the more advantages there are to participating in this program.
Yes. Yeah, and one thing we know about our service area too, in general, in those yellow and green PPI tracts, those areas do have larger outdoor areas and larger landscapes, and do tend to be the higher water users. So they would have more cause to call in for these water checkups as well.
So typically in our rate study, the cost of our water conservation program is primarily picked up by larger water use. So it's in the tier 3 that you're picking up the conservation budget. And I think this really supports that, because those are the people who mainly are taking advantage of the program.
Yes. And then we were curious to try to find the effect of multifamily residential versus single-family residential. So this map is showing the multifamily residential participation rate just compared to total multifamily residential accounts per census tract. And then instead of laying this over the PPI map, it's laid over the multifamily residential density map that Ms. Cook shared earlier. And so we see kind of a similar trend here with in the lower density areas having more participation, but it is more of an even spread in the data. Even though the high goes up to 148%, that's the multiple users. And we do feel like the multifamily residences do show consistent water use. Part of this could be because property owners may be in charge of their landscaped area, or they have a shared HOA, and then that would go with the property manager's checkup account.
A question on this. So
Yeah.
is this all master metered multifamily, or is there any individually metered multifamily on here?
That's a good question. These are all, if the account was categorized as multifamily residential, it was included in this data. But do you have a better?
Yeah.
It's both.
Okay, thank you.
And the next set of water conservation programs we looked at were the outdoor efficiency programs. And the bottom right shows all of the programs that were included. In general, these were specific irrigation evaluations, different sorts of rebates for smart irrigation, and then irrigation rebate. From 2004 to 2024, there were nearly 11,000 participants in this program. And the data is less in the downtown corridor here. I think this makes sense because those areas wouldn't have as much of a landscaped area to really utilize these programs. And this map shows the outdoor efficiency program participation, again, compared to total residential accounts per census tract. And we're back to laying this over the PPI. And the range in participation here is from 9%, which is in the downtown corridor, to 105%. And especially with our outdoor efficiency programs, people use these more than once. Many customers, for example, get a free mulch delivery every year. So that could have kind of skewed this data. And we do see, just keeping in mind where our landscaped areas are in the city, I think it makes sense, especially with this map, that we see higher participation in yellow and green areas. And the last set of programs we looked at are our indoor efficiency programs. We had nearly 6,000 participants in indoor efficiency programs in the last 20 years. And this has a very even spread throughout the city, which matches what we know about indoor water use, that is fairly consistent across homes. And this map shows the percent of indoor efficiency program participation compared to those residential accounts per census tract and over PPI. And I think it's important to note the spread in data here is the least, or the lowest amount of spread that we've seen, from 11% to 35%, which again shows that consistency in indoor water use. And this is the last map. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ms. Cook.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Showers. Okay, so the next set of recommendations focus on strategies to improve accessibility in marketing and communication. Staff will use the results of the historical program analysis that was just presented, and we'll use that to identify areas where more communication and outreach are needed. And staff will specifically explore strategies to improve accessibility to the current water conservation programs, as well as enhance marketing of water smart to low income and multifamily customers where applicable. Oops. So next we're going to kind of change gears and shift to our discussion on affordability. Program, bill assistance program. Okay, and so Staff are considering a bill assistance program that waives or discounts the fixed monthly service charges for water and sewer. So this is similar to what is being implemented by other water agencies in California. But we want to ensure that a bill assistance program is benefiting those that need it most. As we are researching the best approach to this program, we're finding that there's a couple of challenges. We're finding that the lowest income census tracts have the highest density of multifamily residences, and 83% of our multifamily residential units are not individually metered. So then this brings up concerns about discounts potentially not being passed along to the households that qualify for the program if water and sewer are included in rent. In addition, we need to ensure that the program administration is reasonable. It's a reasonable cost for the utility. So currently, our plan is to return to Water Commission in spring with updates on a bill assistance program per the guidance that we received today. And as we begin to think about a bill assistance program, we need to figure out approximately how many customers would benefit and how much of a discount the program would provide. We don't have that specific data right now for our water and wastewater customers, for the income qualified customers, but we can look to another city utility as an example and extrapolate from that for our purposes. So Santa Barbara Clean Energy, they work with Southern California Edison, and if a customer is enrolled in SCE's CARE or FARA program, and those are the low income assistance programs for SCE. So if a customer is enrolled in CARE, they are automatically enrolled in this Green Start rate, which is the lower electricity rate for Santa Barbara Clean Energy. So currently there's a little over 2,000 customers auto-enrolled out of about 44,000 accounts, so that's about 5% of the customers are enrolled in a customer assistance type program. So if we use that ratio and bring it into our water and sewer accounts, we estimate that approximately 1,300 accounts would be eligible for a customer assistance program. I did want to also bring back that LIWAP program, which had 156 participants. So that was fairly low compared to what we think is out there. So we would need to do a lot of promotion and education and communication. So how much of an impact would a bill assistance program have? So on the right of the slide, there's a little table, and it shows the different percent discounts for the fixed charges for water and sewer. And this is for individually metered customers using fiscal year 25 rates, and it assumes a 5/8 inch meter. Annually, the amount of assistance would range from $200,000 to $1 million based on these different percentages of the discount. So in a couple of slides, we're going to ask you all a couple of questions. But before we get there, we wanted to present a case study, and that is the Carpinteria Valley Water District's Lifeline program. This program caught our attention because individual as well as master metered customers are eligible for this program. It's a 20% discount on fixed fees, and qualification is based on enrollment in the CARE program. And it's you have to show proof annually in order to be enrolled in the program. So it's very similar. It's about a 5% of the accounts are in this program for Carpinteria Water. And in regards to the master meter, they're doing an honor system for the landlords to pass along the discount to the tenants. They're looking at this program as more of an avenue to offer assistance rather than policing landlords. The program's been running for about 20 years, and staff reports that it doesn't take a lot of time to administer the program and that there's general customer satisfaction with the program. There are no metrics for measuring effectiveness of the program, except for offering assistance to low-income customers. We want to be forthcoming that a bill assistance program is not going to be perfect. It's going to be hard to make it perfect in every way. But we do think that this is a really important conversation, and we'd really like to get your input and guidance on the following questions. So, given that a bill assistance program will not solve all affordability issues in the city, and reaching multifamily customers in master metered properties is difficult, does Water Commission want staff to pursue a bill assistance program?
And as we kind of contemplate all of this, we of course can't use rate revenue to fund a program like this. It has to come from non-rate revenue sources. The most convenient, if you want to call it that, is the rate penalty fees that are paid. Those currently, though, are already going into the general fund. The general fund had already state claim to that a long time ago, and that is around $400,000 a year. And one might argue it is coming from the people that we're looking to help. I can't confirm that. That would be an interesting data point to know who's paying the penalties. Is this just, hey, oops, I forgot to pay it, or are these people that I am really struggling to make ends meet, and that's why I didn't pay it? So we don't know the answer to that, but that is a potential funding source, and you're all aware of the challenges that the general fund is already having. Outside of that, again, we don't bring in a ton of money from leases, like antenna, that kind of stuff doesn't bring in a ton of money, and we do need to identify a stable source. So there's a lot of challenges around this, not to say they're insurmountable, but kind of getting a sense. I mean, one of the things that I've been really challenged with is, of course we want to help, right? Is this the best way to help? There are a lot of city programs. Are there other ways that the city might approach? Because, when we went out to our community and asked for input on the affordability, we didn't get a lot of input. Even though we went door to door, went to the neighborhoods, people were more focused on my rent is outrageous and I'm having issues with my rent. The water just seemed to be, just part of that equation. So, maybe this is better tackled as a larger issue before the city council on affordability, not necessarily solving it at the utility level. And so we're just putting it out there, just all the things that we're struggling with, trying to figure out where we should go with this. Because I think everybody wants to help, but I don't want it to be symbolic. I want it to actually make a difference.
But one point on the honor-based system for master meter properties, which, I could see the value, but I think an option, I don't know if it's feasible, would be self-certification. So it's you certify that you are actually doing it, and then a random check that to evaluate that in fact they are doing it. And knowing that you're actually going to be randomly evaluated makes it more likely that you will actually comply. I don't know, but it would make sense for me that not to just leave it as an honor system and, some will be, many will, but some won't. And it would be a way to help, because that's the community that we really want to help. This 80-some% of people who have no control over their water. And if they're not getting any relief from that, then that doesn't work. But if we can do something like that, that seems to me an option. Huh?
And I think with that, I don't know if the commission had any thoughts too on the level of assistance, because you can see it ranges from $13 a month to $66 a month. So there's a pretty big spread there. And, what's going to, if you're going to do it, what's going to move the needle is $66.
I had a thought about that. Well, it was interesting to me that, so the CARE program is opt-out, or it's like automatic enrollment, which I think particularly with lower income populations that may not speak English as a primary language, I think the opt-out system is much more effective. I think you see this with the LIWAP, like the fact that only you had 156 accounts when we know that there's, maybe 10 times that could be eligible. And so what about having like an opt-out at that basic level of the 20%? and then you could apply to get additional assistance if you wanted to.
Yeah, and the LIWAP was only for metered customers, correct? I don't believe it was, you weren't eligible in a multifamily situation, like where you didn't pay the water bill.
I believe that's the case, but Ms. Hoffenberg looks like she's ready to come up.
I believe technically they could be eligible, but anecdotally, I don't believe hardly anyone, if any, multifamily customers participated in the LIWAP program.
I believe for the CARE program, there is also an option for units that have, I don't know if there's a master meter or electricity, but there was a contract that you needed to enter into basically with your landlord.
It does seem like, I don't know if it's worthwhile, like, parsing out, because I kind of have different opinions or ideas about, like, low-income residents that are paying a water bill versus low-income residents that are not directly paying a water bill. I don't know if, like, low-income residents that pay their own water bill even is, like, a significant population in Santa Barbara, but to me, those are kind of two separate conversations.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to tease out with all of this data, because the census tracts are roughly the same populations, I think, in those, is how can we kind of tease out, and maybe you could say with the CARE program, the 44,000 electric connections, that's probably more prevalent that individual multifamily has its own electric meter for safety reasons. So there's quite a few housing units out there that are just unmetered.
Is it fair, looking at these numbers, when we have the previous slide, for the 20%, $13, it's about 200K, and then the $66 is about $1 million, so that's roughly it. It seems to me that, if it's going to make any difference, it has to be much closer to the 50 and 100%, because the 20%, I think people will just not even notice it. I mean, unfortunately, it's very small.
And I agree with that, and I think that's where we get into kind of the challenge. If we've got from the penalty fees, that's 400 grand.
That's what I was thinking.
We don't
It's close to 50%, a little less, but yeah.
And then I think there's a program in which you offer it until the money runs out program, but then that has its own, or
Well, and who are the people who are able to apply?
who get in first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Lots of weird.
Well, again, I'll just throw in, at the 30,000-foot level, you also asked the question, should it be tackled outside the water utility context? Clearly, some type of rental assistance program that involves both the city and the county would be the obvious place to do that, and I know council talks about that all the time. So if it wasn't going there, yes, then that addresses the low-income master metered rental unit, right? And probably has, again, that's where I was going, because again, little knowledge of the housing units in the city. That's where most of the issue is. And so if you're going to really try to be strategic and effective, it's addressing those particular households, and they have no control over their water use to a large degree. So again, I fall back, unfortunately, back on a rental assistance program. There is, I don't see any long-term stable source of income that we could tap, since we can't use
Rate revenue.
Rate revenue.
Other than these penalties,
Yeah.
which we don't necessarily
Have access to.
I was wondering, this is kind of a far out there idea, but I've seen, I remember reading when I was in grad school about like a program where there was like a opportunity to like donate on your water bill. It was for an environmental program, but it was basically offering like, hey, do you want to contribute, an extra $5 or whatever on top of your bill that then goes to this special environmental program? And I was wondering if you could potentially do something like that for a bill assistant program.
Could, definitely. I think you'd have to have
I don't know
some.
if we would want to, but I'm just wondering.
But no, it's an interesting, the idea is that you had a program and you were trying to identify, so maybe you could help more people. How could you identify sources of funding? But the stability of that may be based on the economy. The economy goes down, people stop donating.
That's the problem.
Yeah,
It would have to then be as like a as available.
Right, and maybe that works for an environmental fundraising thing, but for this might be a little more.
It's tough. I mean, I love that idea, but I think as a jaded person, I wouldn't, sorry, I'm sort of jaded, but I mean, like, I don't feel great about the master metered, like, honor system situation. So if you were like, hey, do you want to donate money to help low-income people? And I would be like, Meridian Group's going to put that in their pocket and no one is ever going to see it, right? And, or, any of Barline or whoever they are, like, right, as someone that has rented in the city, I personally do not have positive feelings about honor systems and large management companies, to be as diplomatic as humanly possible. And so if I saw that, and I'm someone who's interested in, letting people, like, helping with affordability or low-income people, like, I would love to be a part of that, but I wouldn't feel comfortable donating on a city bill where money was potentially going to a rental corporation or a landlord instead of actually people.
Yeah. I agree
And
with
I
that.
don't know if I would be alone in that feeling.
No, I agree.
You wouldn't be.
You would not be.
Yeah, I mean, I've always appreciated that this community has always been forward-thinking about things, and certainly we have spent hours, days thinking about how could we, taking bits and pieces of what others have done, how could we apply that to our community? How can we make that work? And again, going back to that, I'm not interested in doing something symbolic. I want something that is making a difference in people's lives because I want everyone to have access to water here. How do we accomplish that? And I'm just really frustrated that we could not come up with something that I felt worked, except as Commissioner Davis was saying, some type of broader program that the city was doing to really address, along with the housing situation, address affordability on that seemed to be more effective, and to the extent that, they're already, and unfortunately, I wish we had the penalty fees to give the general fund at this point, but they've already had those fees. So really isn't a huge avenue for us to participate. So we're then we're kind of turning to the council and saying, hey, we recommend a broader program and not necessarily a water or wastewater specific assistance program.
Certainly.
It isn't just water, wastewater, and trash is big.
Yeah.
And it's gonna go up even more.
Right.
And so it is essentially the baseline, utility functions that basically are gonna continue to go up.
Yeah.
You're gonna need overall rental assistance.
Yeah. No, you get into that, what is it, the minimum income
Yep.
concept, which
Concept, correct.
I think is really what is probably more warranted here and would be way more effective to administer, get rid of a lot of the administration costs.
Were there any other examples in the AWE report around like other multifamily affordability programs?
We did contact Pleasanton. Maybe you can share what you.
It wasn't specific to like master metered, but there are several different programs out there. So City of Pleasanton has a 20% discount for a bill assistance program, and then they have a 30% discount, senior discount. So if you're over X age, you get 30% off of your fixed account. But all of it is tied back to CARES. So in order to participate in these programs, you need to show proof of enrollment in CARE.
Interesting.
And of course, we asked too, do you have any metrics to show if the program is successful? And nothing to.
I mean, I think we all kind of are dancing around the fact that nobody wants to say that it looks like the amount of effort it would take to potentially not have a program you could measure that is making a difference for people is maybe not 100% worth the time. I know, I hate saying unpopular things, but, right, because I love the idea of making this not a burden for people that live in the city, but like, is $13 a month or even $66 a month going to be moving the needle for people's budget?
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
is the effort for that has already gone into this and that would go into administering any kind of program that you could baseline, you could report against, you could, convince yourself that the time was spent, was making a difference for people's day-to-day budget?
I think if, a couple things. I think if all of our customer dwelling units were all metered, this would be an effective program. I think the challenge is we now know with the data that the people struggling live in multifamily and likely majority do not have access to a meter. So the people we want to help, we can't really help. And because if we did, you're right, that would be the best, because then we're making sure that their water use, their water bill is approachable. And that's bottom line the best. And I mean, so to that, if we're setting a long-term goal is how can we assist our multifamily? We already have it on the books requiring it of any new multifamily. How do we go about helping existing housing stock, which is aged, and that's probably why it's affordable. So that's more affordable, I shouldn't say, than the rest. How can we help them make the investments to convert to individual, even if it's private metering, it's probably private sub-metering, again, where they're required to bill their tenants based on individual water usage, so we don't have a relationship, but at least that would be moving the needle in the right direction.
Do we have an idea of the cost of doing that? In other words, the cost of the multi-mirroring, and then one would then see how can we progress, what's the objective, and how soon can we do it, and where we get the funding. So it'd be easier to get funding for that than it is.
And I, at one point, spoke to a group of, I don't know how to describe it, but multifamily property owners, and they all wished that the developer or it had that, but the cost to put that in now was cost prohibitive for them, and it didn't seem, when we talked about it, it wasn't like, oh, if we had, like, for example, some type of low interest loan for them to do it. It was, I don't know that we could justify the cost for that. Like, it would be, if they were doing a remodel of the whole facility, maybe that's the time to do it, but just to go in for that, it didn't make financial sense.
Well, and I wonder, well, so one, I think there's a risk there that, like, it backfires and then they're like, okay, here's your rent, and then also here's your water bill that you're now paying because we're individually metering. So there could be a backfire effect there. But I know that the state has that rule. It's like any property, multifamily property that's built after, 2017 or 2018 or something has to be individually water metered. I don't think there's anything about retrofits. I don't know. But that could be like something that the city decides to do theoretically, is say, okay, any retrofits of some certain extent. Because I don't know. I do think that gets at the population that we know needs it the most. But I do think coming back to the question of, like, where does this fall within the water utility? I'm not sure it's the best place for it at this time. Next question.
Is there any additional information? I mean, you guys, we can take a vote on that or not, but is there any additional information we could provide that would help with this conversation? Because, honestly, you guys are landing a lot of where we were on this. We're really struggling with that. Like, were we missing something? Is there something that would change the equation? I appreciate the idea, and we can take a look at that, of whether or not our current ordinances, because we've heard this loud and clear in this current climate of evicting people, making improvements, the rent goes way up. I don't know when they do that if they're required to do, they're not required to do the meter. So that could be an angle, but that's not going to help the cost of housing. That is going to increase it. So I don't know that really pushes us in the right direction.
I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, because this is so bleak, but if you're going to get rent evicted anyway, you might as well have that information going forward for the future. Like, it's not gonna help anyone now, but maybe it helps someone in 20 years when it needs to be updated again, and it's back to being the lower income option. I know that is the bleakest thing I've maybe said in a while. Sorry,
But
everyone.
You can go round and round on
Right.
that, though, because in fact, that's a new requirement. If you want to remodel a facility,
Yeah.
now you got to tack those on, which will then basically say, maybe I don't want to remodel, because in fact, it pushed it over the line. There are so many factors which are
Right.
there. The real question that came back to is this something that through the water billing process or through the water billing, whatever, it's a proper role that we can actually make a significant effect upon? I think staff, you've said it, you've been kind of like gone around the tree on that one. I think we have too, and I just don't see that there's any direct type of activity that we could do that would result in significant impact and assistance to the people who need it in those multifamily units in the inner city.
Is the LIWAP program still going or coming back? It's done.
It ended in March, March 2024, but there is a push to make it a permanent program.
And that's through the state or federal? Got it, okay. Because I think one option is if, any way that we can support that program coming back, and then also maybe increased efforts to up enrollment in that program, right? Now that we kind of understand there's probably a disparity between eligibility and participation, maybe that's just something is like really trying to support enrollment in that program should it return.
Yeah.
So in terms of having this more tackled at a city-wide level, is there any thoughts or recommendations on how to bring this or if to bring this to council?
Yeah, I mean, I know the commission had some communication with council members, various council members on stuff, and I don't know if it starts with a conversation there, but I don't know that it's something that staff would bring necessarily if the council asked for it, or if the commission directed us. That's certainly another thing, but I'm not sure where to go from here, and maybe conversations with council member Sneddon might be helpful on that.
Well, you could start with the discussion at the department head level, so that you have put that out there as that we're one component of this larger question.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, community development's going to be involved in that also, in that regard, finance and whoever. Start at the department head level, maybe, and the council has a housing subcommittee, and basically has indicated that we've gone through this. We understand that our water rates are part of the equation. We don't see that we can play a significant role, but rental assistance programs could possibly address the impacts of the future.
Yeah.
Is this something we could add to the agenda for next month's meeting that we have with Arturo and I and Councilmember Sneddon and you, if
Yes,
she's able to
of course.
join?
Yes.
Because especially since she can't be here today, I think it would be worthwhile just to circle back on it there and get her thoughts.
Yeah. Yes, that'd be great. And I don't know if you have a chance to reach out to her before that meeting, and maybe she can watch this conversation and.
We can try, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any further comments? Okay.
I guess, yeah, or one thing also just thinking about, there was the other piece in progress here around, or I guess it's, the one, thinking about how to use AMI and Water Smart to specifically target customers that are in those lower income tracts or might benefit from that. Could you guys just speak a little bit more to where you are with that?
Yeah, take that.
So Chair Snyder, we do have a communications plan for WaterSmart for rolling it out, and we are working with our consultants to develop recommendations to target low-income and multifamily properties. I've asked around for other utilities to get their experience, and it's still sort of a new avenue and a hard nut to crack, honestly, across the board. But some of the recommendations have been to meet with the council members who are in those districts and coordinate in terms of public events, community organizations. As you can see in a lot of the water affordability recommendations, it's working with organizations that are already working with community members who are struggling with income, and making sure that they know that this can be a helpful tool for them, that they can get alerted to leaks quicker, they can monitor their water usage. So those have been some of the recommendations that we're chewing on and will be put into the communications plan.
Appreciate that. I was just thinking, I don't know how much of this is in Santa Barbara, but I've worked with LA in the past and property owners that are specifically like nonprofit property owners or mission-driven property owners that are providing low-income housing. I don't know if that really exists here in Santa Barbara, but that could be another avenue of organizations that have the intention to kind of be mission-driven and may be interested in participating in conservation for that affordability aspect.
Yes, definitely. Those are the organizations we'll be working with. A lot of those, like for example, the Housing Authority, they have access to WaterSmart, they use it, but the folks that live in the Housing Authority properties, of course, don't have access to that data. So it just depends on how the organization is structured, but yes.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Any public comment?
Chair Snyder, we have no speakers for public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. And our final item, 6D, the Water Efficiency 2.0.
Good afternoon once again. My name is Dakota Corey. I'm the Water Supply and Services Manager for the city, and I'm just going to tee up this presentation. You'll notice a change in wording. In the past, we've referred to our water conservation program, and when we were kind of throwing around this idea, it started out as Water Conservation 2.0, but we've expanded it to Water Efficiency 2.0, and really this is driven by a series of changing conditions that is driving us to needing a broader perspective. So as you know, we've implemented AMI in our WaterSmart customer portal, which gives us new and different access to our customers and our ability to interact with them in terms of being more efficient with their water use. We also had the presentation earlier on the new state regulations and some of the requirements that entails. And we had a previous presentation on water affordability and sort of our desire to include an affordability lens in the work that we do in our water efficiency program. So we've rebranded Water Conservation 2.0 to Water Efficiency 2.0 because we're going to have this broader perspective that looks at our traditional water conservation programs, water loss coming from the state regulations, and then also some sort of potentially affordability or equity metric. So we're hoping to update our technical analysis. You'll know that in 2020, I think we started working on it in 2018, we developed our water conservation strategic plan. That's a process that we go through with a technical model that analyzes each of our programs to come up with a cost-effective water conservation program for the city. So we'd like to update that analysis, again, with this broadened scope. And I kind of want to acknowledge sort of an elephant in the room, if you will, that, we do have plenty of water supply currently. The reservoirs are full. I was just up at Cachuma on Monday. It's beautiful. But as we know, the next drought is just right around the corner, and the effectiveness of our conservation program, which you've seen in these past presentations, is really due to the effort of our strategic planning around water conservation. And just because we have water in the reservoirs now, it doesn't mean that we can let our guard down. I think our community is so efficient because we have this long-standing relationship with them, and we've been working hand in hand with our customers for the last 20 years. So hopefully that tees up this next conversation around water efficiency.
Chair Snyder and members of the Water Commission, my name is Madeline Wood. I'm the Water Conservation Analyst. And as Ms. Corey stated, the two previous presentations really help set the stage for Water Efficiency 2.0. It's really a more expansive and inclusive approach to water conservation. So Ms. Hoffenberg and I will be presenting our vision for Water Efficiency 2.0, and then we do have some discussion questions at the end regarding direction from Water Commission on this plan. So Water Efficiency 2.0 seeks to answer the question, where do we go from here? City customers are among the most efficient in the state, and they've really adopted water conservation as a way of life here. However, our prolonged droughts do continue to be our largest threat to our supplies, and as we heard earlier, the state regulations require that we meet the standards through at least 2040. So we want to optimize our conservation program by utilizing our new tools like AMI, as well as broadening the scope of water efficiency to include water loss in the city's distribution system and customer equity. So here in conservation and supply, we're really big on data-driven decision-making. So traditionally, our conservation program was designed and operated based on technical analyses that we used to evaluate the cost effectiveness of the water saved compared to the avoided cost of additional water supplies. And to do that, we used our Decision Support System model, or DSS model. And that's an end-use model, so it'll break down water demands in our community to specific water end uses, such as plumbing fixtures and appliances. And this is essentially a bottom-up approach that allows for multiple criteria to be considered to estimate future demands, such as the effects of natural fixture replacement, the plumbing code, and of course, our conservation efforts. So these measures then go through a benefit-cost analysis, and then the end result is demand projections under various scenarios that we can model. So as part of Water Efficiency 2.0, we plan to update the DSS model and the Water Conservation Strategic Plan that were last run in 2020. We want to project future water demands by using our current historical and projected population and commercial growth rates, the local employment rates, and projections for water bill rates. We also need to update the demand projections due to lower water use, higher rainfall, and also to incorporate the state housing requirements that were not finalized when the last analysis was done. We'll then evaluate the current conservation measures and identify new AMI optimized conservation measures to reduce future water demands. We'll quantify the costs and savings using the same cost effectiveness metric as the water loss control strategic plan. And we'll develop a customer equity scoring system, evaluate the costs, water savings, and equity, and then analyze the budget and staffing levels needed for the recommended measures. So some of the examples of the measures to analyze include the school education program for kindergarten through 6th grade in-class presentations, a high-efficiency toilet direct installation program for income-qualified customers, and a suite of landscape rebates that can be stacked incentives with stormwater pollution prevention rebates that are under consideration by the Sustainability and Resilience Department. This effort will also support the development of the 2025 Urban Water Management Plan. Yes, it is once again time for that. So this is a 5-year report that's required by the state. It's due July 1st, 2026, and this will provide updated water supply demand projections. Just to note, this 2025 plan will not include an in-depth long-term water supply plan analysis because luckily the analysis that we and you all did in the previous plan is still relevant to our current water supply conditions. And as Ms. Cook outlined in the previous presentation, many of the water affordability study recommendations include expanding access to and outreach for our low-income or high-burdened households. So this involves designing programs that provide equitable access for water-saving technologies and support for all of our customer classes. And now I will turn it over to Ms. Hoffenberg to talk about water loss control.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Dana Hoffenberg. I'm a Water Resources Analyst, and I'm going to be talking to you more about water loss control and how that fits into the world of water efficiency. So at a very high level, what is water loss? Water loss is essentially the water we produce minus the water that is consumed in an authorized fashion. So that's water that we sell to our customers through their customer retail meters, or water used for firefighting or water main flushing, things like that. And everything else is essentially water that is lost. It's broken down into two further components, real loss and apparent loss. Real loss is physical water that actually leaks out of the system through things like water main breaks or leaks. Apparent loss is more of a paper loss, if you will. It comes from things like under-registering customer meters, data handling errors, those kinds of issues. When we were talking about the framework, as Ms. Showers was explaining earlier, and we have a water loss standard from the state, the standard is only referring to real loss. So the state is very much just focused on the real loss component of water loss. So a lot of times when we're talking about loss, it's mostly about real loss. As a city, though, of course, we are concerned about water loss in general. We're not just going to be focusing on real loss, but when we're talking about the regulatory framework, that is what they're referring to. So when we are looking at what our water loss standard is, again, it's the real loss standard. It's 28.8 gallons per connection per day. And when we're talking about what's the actual volume of water, and it's, you know, kind of a significant amount of water. It can be between 850 to 900 acre feet a year of water. So this is not something we want to ignore, of course. Our standard specifically for the city ended up being calculated based on average water losses over a few years. So there have been years where we had used more than our standard, and there have been years when we've been under that standard. As of our last 2 water loss audits, we have been meeting or under that standard. So that is good. That being said, you know, this is more of an emerging field where people are really starting to pay attention to this now. You know, there's legislation around this now. Can be significant amounts of water. We have to meet legislative requirements. So it is time for us to develop a water loss control strategic plan, just like we have our conservation strategic plan and our water supply management plan. So the strategic plan, the goals would be to increase confidence in our water loss calculations and data, help ensure that we meet our legislative targets, and it will also direct our cost-effective water loss control efforts into the future.
Just real quick question, Madam Chair. I kind of missed it when you went real fast on the real loss standard. I heard something like per connection, and then I look up there and I see almost 1,000 acre feet a year. That's a big number.
Yeah, so the 28.8 is gallons per connection per day. Okay. And when you multiply that out by how many connections we have, the days in the year, and convert from gallons to acre feet.
Yeah, just running about to 1,000, and we're at 10,000 acre feet. It's like, 10% loss.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's definitely not an insignificant amount of water,
right? I kind of went through one ear and came out the other. Wow. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that does highlight the need to have a water loss control strategic plan. And we're not outside of the norm in terms of the standard is a pretty typical standard when we're looking at the standards of us and our neighbors. We're not. This isn't abnormal amount of loss. So I think, but this is why that there's starting to be a lot more attention paid to this space because it is an emerging space for efficiency, and there's a lot to be done in this area.
Just out of curiosity, do you know offhand what the apparent loss is? Even though that's not part of the standard.
In terms of, yes. Yeah. In terms of volume, it's generally less. It's a couple hundred to a few hundred acre feet a year. That being said, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in future slides, when we're breaking out real loss versus apparent loss, it is very educated and technical guesswork.
Yeah.
So, it's how scientific is it? It depends on how good our data is, which brings me to our next topic, which is how do we actually calculate our loss? And that is our water loss audit. We use the AWWA water loss software, and there's a screenshot of it up here on the screen. We are required to complete these annually and submit them to the Department of Water Resources. We, as the city, have been conducting water loss audits since 2010, just as a best management practice. It wasn't required by the state until 2017. Now, as part of the required state program, it does have to be in a specific format, and it has to be validated by a third-party validator, so we have to hire an auditor to audit our audit. And an important one of the most important pieces actually of the audit is what's known as the data validity score. So essentially the audit grades the quality of our data and allows us to measure the confidence that we have in our data and in the results of the audit. So in every single blue box you'll see in that screenshot right there, we're required to answer a series of questions for every input that's asking us about how we got the data, our methodologies for data collection, auditing procedures, all these kinds of things. And based on the results, based on those questions, our answers to those questions, it assigns us a score for every single input. And this helps guide us to see what areas we need to shore up our data on. And then it also provides us an overall score on the audit. And so the score, it is a data validity score. It's not a water loss score. So it's not a score of like how good we're doing in terms of the level of our loss. It's a score of how good our data is, and thus gives us a measure of how confident we are in the data. If we can throw data in here we're not very confident in, and it'll show we're losing no water, but then the validity of our data would have to be pretty low. So that's a really, really key piece of the water loss audit, is enhancing our data quality and confidence. And that is going to be a key piece of our water loss control strategic plan that we're hoping to get help with a consultant on. We've put together a series of tasks that we want to be part of this assessment and this plan. And that first task would be assessing our water loss audits. So it would be examining our water loss audit methodologies and input data quality. And we're looking for recommendations on how to improve our data quality and increase the confidence of our audit results, so that we could be a lot more confident when I'm telling you the breakdown of our real loss versus our apparent loss, or how confident I am in exactly how much water we're losing every year. Because a lot of loss can come from, metering errors. So it's hard to measure what you're not measuring. So there's a lot of nuances that can go along with this. So the results of this more technical analysis will then inform task 2.
I've got a question for you. So just to clarify things for me, on real loss, this is what you're going to be collecting data on, and I can see main breaks and reservoir leaks. That's kind of tangible. What about the other categories?
So the water loss.
Where's that data coming from?
Great. Yeah, so the water loss audit does not just focus on real loss. So the water loss audit looks at our total loss and helps us tease out how much we think is coming from real loss versus how much we think is coming from apparent loss. So we have to submit these annual audits to the state, and then the state is going to be looking at how much real loss we have that audit is showing, and then they're going to assess if we're meeting our standard.
But
So
what data is being inputted into the audit?
Right, the primary data inputs are how much water we produced, so looking at our main production meters, our large meters that up at Crater Water Treatment Plant, and then how much water we are selling. So, we're looking at the combined water consumption of all of our customers. Those are going to be the key data inputs. There's also a lot of other data inputs, things like how many connections do you have? What's your average water system pressure? Do you have any known data handling errors that created some kind of data error that you can put in and tell us about? How much does your water cost to produce? How much are you selling your water for? So there's a lot of different data inputs that go into the audit, but the primary, the most important ones are how much water did you produce and how much water did you sell?
So if I could just follow up on that, in terms of the under-registering customer meters, you have to estimate that information?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I guess a question, do we ever survey in any form to basically, what's the basis for making that estimation? Because that's pretty data intensive.
So we've done a few things. When we were, we have virtually new meters. I mean, again,
Yeah.
meters have a 20-ish year lifespan, and it really depends on usage, right? And that's where AMI is going to help us, because we'll know exactly how much, because some households don't use very much. That meter is probably good for a much longer period of time versus some that are getting extensive use. So, but when we were pulling meters, we were bench testing them to see how those outdated meters, and again, what's challenging is some of the meters could be dead on at 5 gallons per minute, but at that half a gallon a minute, they weren't doing very well. You know what I mean? One thing about the meters that we have, they're positive displacement meters, they don't overread. They always underread. And so that's good or bad. That's, in the favor of our customers, that works out. But when it comes to water loss, that's typically a challenge. I mean, this water could be actually being delivered to our customers. It's just not effectively being measured. Again, with 27,000 meters, getting it right for every single meter and knowing that there's not more water leaving is a difficult undertaking. And right now we're kind of in that sweet spot because all of our meters are less than 10 years old. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's no loss there in water in that situation. There's a loss in revenue.
Correct.
Right.
But the water is going to where it's supposed to go. It's being consumed.
Right.
Correct. And that's
an apparent, yeah.
it's
Right.
an apparent loss. Yeah.
Correct, it is an unaccounted for water, and which in this field we refer to as water loss, because it is unaccounted for water, yeah. And Commissioner Davis, I do have more slides on the water metering and data handling issues in a forward slide, so we'll get to that too. And then the second task will be one of the main, the bulk of the work of the water loss control strategic plan will be actually creating the plan. So it'll be using the technical analysis that we did in task 1, and that will be helping to inform us on what our path forward is going to be. So as part of the plan, we will be developing a menu, if you want to say that, of water loss control interventions. And this is a really key piece will be creating a cost effectiveness metric for all of those different interventions. And that cost effectiveness metric will be the same metric that we use in our water conservation strategic plan, so that we can more easily compare apples to apples when we're looking at a water efficiency intervention in terms of water loss versus a water efficiency intervention in terms of conservation. And then we're also going to be having our consultant look into really specific areas of interest for us, as Mr. Hagmark was talking about earlier. How do we leverage our new AMI data? We have a huge amount of data now. How can we leverage that in the area of water loss? And we also have an AMI infrastructure. We have a radio network now. We have different things that we could plug into this network. So how can we leverage that for water loss control? We're also going to be looking into production meter volumetric testing. As we were discussing earlier, production, how much water we produce is one of the key metrics of inputs into the water loss audit. So it's important to make sure that we know that those meters are accurate. What are our plans for testing to make sure that they're accurate? Another thing we're going to be looking into is proactive leak detection and the possibility for future studies on pressure management.
So just one of the slides here that is a Venturi meter. So it's usually what we use in our large production. It has no moving parts in it, and it's just measuring a pressure differential change. Those meters work really well in a certain volume flow rate, but as we saw during the drought, and you get down into these ranges that, at least at Cater, we'd never anticipated that their production would be that low. It really causes a lot of problems with these. So we did get a different Venturi there that has a different range on it. But these are some of the challenges that we're kind of working through. And of course, we do quarterly, I think it's quarterly calibration of these things, but it's really difficult to actually do a flow test through it. Again, there's no moving parts in it. It shouldn't change, but again, we have hard water and other issues here that could potentially skew. Again, a little minor change here makes millions of gallons difference. So just some of the challenges we're working with. And as we kind of drill into this water loss discussion, we have so many pressure zones because of the topography that we have here, which makes it particularly challenging. And so future ideas are to have metered into each one of the pressure zones. So we not only know our production, but we know actually how much went into each one of those pressure zones and then exactly how much left. Again, giving us a better sense of maybe how much was lost due to leakage and or if there's other metering challenges, yeah.
Currently, we don't have metering in the distribution system other than once it gets to the households or the customers.
Right, we have some at the pump stations, but not that you could actually calibrate how much went into a zone, yeah.
And then going into our next block of tasks for the water loss control strategic plan, we are going to be working on developing a meter testing and replacement program. So as we were talking about earlier, we have just replaced all of our meters. They're all less than 10 years or less than 10 years old at this point. We want to make sure that we, upkeep that system as to the best of our ability. So we want to answer questions such as, how many meters should we be testing and at what intervals? When should we be replacing meters? As Mr. Hagmark was saying, the industry is moving away from, we should just replace all meters every X amount of years, and it's more moving towards how many, miles are on the meter, how much water has been flowing through the meter. And so this will really help us in the long run reduce our apparent loss. If we have a meter testing program and we do random samples of certain amount of meters at certain intervals, we can get an idea of what the accuracy of our meter population is. And once we have that meter accuracy number, that will allow us to more accurately estimate what our apparent losses are. So that's kind of the data collection that would be required to have a more valid estimate of what our apparent losses could be. So overall, this meter testing and replacement program would improve our water loss audit data confidence, which is really key to this field. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ms. Wood.
So our last slide is just the questions for Commission to consider, both for the Water Conservation Technical Analysis and the Water Loss Control Strategic Plan. Essentially, are we missing anything that you want to see captured in those? And then given the data presented in the discussion that you just had about the water affordability study, do you feel like an equity metric in addition to our standard cost effectiveness metric should be included in our technical analysis?
And maybe to kind of, we could give an example of that, because again, right now our programs are driven primarily by cost effectiveness. And so I think bringing in this equity metric, maybe you could give an example of how that might be applied.
So what we have heard from our affordability study, and as is also common sense, is rebates require money up front, and then the customer is reimbursed for that. And so that can be a barrier, for example. That could be something that could have a lower equity score versus one of the things we've been looking into is some sort of income qualified direct install program where there isn't money that's required up front. So being able to understand that not all customers are able to afford the changes or afford the changes up front, even if in the long term it's cost effective for them to do. They get a return on investment with a lower water bill. So trying to take into consideration that it's not just the city's cost effectiveness. And we do technically in the DSS model have a community cost effectiveness, but it's not based on income qualified customers. It's more about in general what customers would be investing into the toilet or the washing machine or the landscape. So it's not based on low income customers.
I don't know if you need a specific metric that would be applicable kind of across measures, but it does just seem like kind of qualitatively, as you're already doing, bringing in the insights from the affordability assessment. I think those maps that you presented earlier really help kind of paint that picture of, who's participating in what kinds of programs, and we know now where the most cost burdened areas are. I do think that consideration of programs that are specifically targeted at multifamily housing, now that we have the sense of that's really where the most cost burdened residents are, is just a good thing to look towards in general. In addition to, are there models where we don't need to use a rebate function and can avoid that upfront cost?
If I may, I just want to add a little bit more to Ms. Wood's answer. the way I was kind of envisioning this equity measure is, as directed by council, we currently have our cost effectiveness scale, and that's really how we decide like what's in and what's out with the conservation program. It's either cost effective or it's not, compared to purchasing the next available supply. And so what I was sort of envisioning with this equity measure is that it would almost be like bonus points. So we're not going to get rid of the cost effectiveness measure. That's really valuable for communicating about programs in a wide range of places. But say a program like a direct install of high efficiency toilets, maybe it doesn't pencil out on that cost effectiveness hierarchy quite as much as you would want, but it gets bonus points because it's breaking down these barriers of affordability. And so that's kind of how I was envisioning this would work. They're two separate measures, but it's almost like some bonus points for these programs that do break down those barriers.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I like that.
I like the term water efficiency, and so I really support that. I think the message is, and every time we have, for example, water conservation technical analysis, we should change that to water efficiency just to be consistent. Because as you read this document, we go back and forth between those two words, and it's just to be consistent, use one. So I was thinking with respect to those customers that have a high consumption, how much targeting there is to provide them with the information, because those are the ones that really need that information. And going back to where and how to best utilize our resources, if we do target them, that'd be great. But to focus that effort there, I think that's something that would be useful to have, and also identification of those customers.
One of the things I was kind of interested in is how it changes as we need more from our community, like how we ramp up communication in particular, because always trying to balance that revenue, need for revenue, we have the water, and then as things tighten up, where exactly we surgically are messaging or targeting folks, and how that maybe under this new program, we are more surgical in that way.
Where we've been really focusing our effort is on leaks. We do have the ability with AMI and other sort of complementary software that we could purchase to find and have targeted education programs and outreach to customers who seem to be using more than their neighbors based on certain criteria and landscape area and such. But for now, we're really busy with the leaks. And that benefits any person of any type of income. And so that's certainly been the focus ever since we implemented AMI. We do have other tools, but in the near term, it's certainly been the leaks that's keeping us busy.
Any other comments? All right. Is there any public comment on this topic?
Chair Snyder, we don't have any speakers for public comment.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move to the Water Resources Manager's report, final item, which I don't think I have a copy of.
All right. It's hard. Hopefully you can pull up your little attachment here. Just wanted to note, Ms. Showers and Ms. Hoffenberg have been busy updating our production, which has been something that's been bugging them for a very long time. So now we have a column here for groundwater recharge. So that's our ASR stuff. I hope as we finally get approval, we can start to see that populated when we do have excess water. We have our overlap agreements here. This is, again, there are some parts of our city that Goleta serve. We serve Goleta customers, all this kind of stuff. This kind of helps to summarize that water that's leaving our system. We produced it, but it's leaving our system. And then total potable sales. So again, these Montecito is primarily captured here, but we've also got an agreement with La Cumbre if we were to sell them any water. It's kind of accounted for as well. And then, of course, we've had on here a while the blend water if we're ever using any blend water. And so it's giving us a sense of what's leaving our system and what our customers are not using. So I thought this was a helpful addition to the graph, even though it made it smaller. Anyway.
So, quick question. The total potable sales, the ones that we sell to Montecito and others, it's a very consistent number. Is that is that for a reason? Minus 117?
That is the agreement we have with them.
So regardless, they get that water, or that's just, is this real water or paper water?
Real water.
Okay.
And I can, yes, so the way it works is the first water that is delivered to them is under the water sales agreement, and then the rest would be their La Cumbre water, or sorry, Cachuma water. However, with this, and this is a good point, that takes us to some of my points I want to talk about, desal is currently offline.
Yeah.
Okay, so desal's offline. In March, we had one of the offshore pumps fail. And then the other one failed a couple weeks ago. And they had the other pump back. They put it in. It lasted about a couple hours, and then it failed. So it leaked. Water got in. It just fried it. Both of those pumps are now down in LA getting rebuilt. One has got a 4 to 5 week lead time to be rebuilt. The other one has an 8 to 9 week lead time. In the meantime, we have no ability to bring water on shore. So per our contract, we could say, hey, Montecito, this is obviously we're not in ability to deliver that water. However, we have the water, and as long as we're delivering our water, they have to keep paying desal prices for that water. So we can get into the complications of that because the way that our contract works, IDE owes us penalties, liquidated damages for not producing the water. And we could bring Montecito in and share the liquidated damages, or in this case, we'll deal with Montecito because we have the water right now and we'll continue to deliver. Long, complicated story, but that's roughly how it works right now. Yeah. So,
You're gonna be careful with my questions.
yeah.
Can I ask a question? And again, I'm down here at the end, maybe I didn't hear it. Is Montecito included in the 10,000 acre feet or not?
They are pulled out.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
so how and when are we going to start to begin reporting them, including them, because they are part of the total?
So that is on the next slide, this one. They are included on this one. Yes.
I guess the question is, and again, maybe I don't have a handle on it. If in fact this chart is showing all the supply that we've produced, and we're now going to basically give 1,000+ acre feet to Montecito, where's that water coming from?
Right, so our planning includes it, but we want to make sure when we're reporting it, we're talking about what our customers use. So that's the attempt here.
That's my question. How do you see the big picture?
Right. So our planning includes them. When we do our planning, it includes the water that they're using. This was to help break down specifically when we talk about our customers' potable demands.
Yeah.
It's here, but we do in our planning include them as part of that.
But in this report, the sources are shown, and then the transfer is shown in the potable sales. So it's there in the potable sales.
Yeah.
That's the number.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to offer
So-
that clarification. So if you look at the chart on the previous slide, Mr. Hagmark, the columns that have the colorful headers are our supply sources. So that's everything coming in. And then the white bars are water going out that does not add up to the water that we specifically sell to our customers. And so the water system total on the far right columns,
I see the
that
12
includes the water that we sell to
Okay, so I
Montecito.
see the 12,000 acre feet. That
includes Montecito.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's exactly where I was trying to get
Okay.
to. Thank you.
Great. If there's no more questions on that, I have a few things I wanted to go over. So just water revenues for the first 2 months of our fiscal year, we're down about 1.2 million in water. Wastewater is on track right now, so we're looking good there. Wastewater manager recruitment is out and closes in early October, mid-October, somewhere in there. Jose Acosta, our water services superintendent, is leaving us. He's taking a job with Solvang. Shorter commute, more pay. Can't compete there. So anyway, we'll be celebrating him after work today. but I really do appreciate all of his service and his leadership with his team. He's been a great addition to our team. Let's see. We filled 2 of our vacancies in distribution, so we've down from 6 vacancies down to 4. Doing good there. We are currently hosting 2 interns from the Ventura College Water Sciences program. Really excited to see how that works out. So far, so good. And again, walk onto the job with some base information, and we're working with them so that they stay enrolled in the program. We'd like to see them finish it, even if employment with us doesn't work out. But either way, I'm excited to get that off the ground. Sustainability and Resiliency Department, we've been running into some interesting challenges, as you might guess. They have some really great goals. Council's given them some pretty clear objectives to go after, and we're struggling to keep pace with them. We have our core focus that we need to do. They've got climate action and energy projects, and between engineering and water resources, we're just struggling to keep pace. And so we're having some internal discussions about how exactly we align resources to do that. We've had, right now, there's a grant for $1.2 million to do a battery solar project at one of our pump stations, and we just don't have any people on our end to kind of support that. And of course, we need to be involved because it's a critical pump station. And so, anyway, I'm just sharing with you some of the challenges that are going on as I think there's this desire to shrink the workforce, but we're adding climate change, we're adding all these energy projects, and it's really taken kind of us in a different direction. And then what was my last one? Cost control strategies. This is one that probably going to hear more from me. I know we've talked about it a little bit today, like just continue. Every time I turn around, there's something going up. IT wants more, fleet wants more money. We've tried to electrify our fleet, and that has a premium associated with it. And really just trying to hold on to not having to do any drastic rate increases after what we've already implemented. And so I'm hoping that'll be more of a conversation this year as we kind of work through issues, just talking more about the financials behind it, because it's rough. And I think as our customers, this year wasn't bad, but as these start to amount on the utility bill, people are going to use less of our product, which is great in one hand, but we still need to pay the bills on the other hand. So anyway, we'll definitely need the Water Commission's help on communicating that and how to navigate that. So that's all I had. And if there's any questions for me, I'm happy to answer it. Oh, yes. I forgot to introduce Summers Case. She's our new Water Commission secretary. You'll be receiving emails from her. So excited to have her. She's spent 10 years working for Parks and Rec as their marketing coordinator. And we're able to bring her over here. And so she's going to be working with all of you, but also helping with our internal communication with our water resources team. So
Welcome.
that's all I have.
Great. Yes. All right, we'll adjourn for today and reconvene on October 17th. Thanks all.
Right.